Pokemon is a game where you lean into the fantasy of traveling the world and adventuring with your beloved pets. But to overcome the cognitive dissonance of essentially sending your best friends into cage battles, we're going to need a cool and relatable main character that we can project ourselves onto. Now, Game Freak's taken plenty of stabs at it, but as the most qualified person on the internet, I went ahead and ranked all the Pokemon trainer designs. That way we could see which ones are the best, which ones are the worst, and of course which ones stand out, whether it be for good or bad reasons. Now, just so we're all on the same page, let me go ahead and actually lay out the ground rules that I'll be using to rank the designs. Rule number 1 is that we'll be looking at official game artwork only, so this means no anime, no fan games, or no fan art that you've seen on Google Images. Most of my attention will be on the portraits. I just see these as the designer's best foot forward, but since we do spend a considerable amount of time staring at the in-game assets as well, I'll consider these if they either really help fuel my imagination or really bother me. Rule number 2 is that I will be distinguishing between different designs on the same character. So say for example a remake comes out and they choose to style a character that we've already seen, well, I'm going to go ahead and rank each of them individually. Some of these redesigns might be pretty minor and not much is going to change, while with others, let's just say I'm going to have opinions on. Rule number 3, I do appreciate when Game Freak chooses to offer some customization, whether it be clothes, skin tone, eye color, whatever, but for the sake of this tier list, I'm not going to be factoring those into consideration. And last but not least, rule number 4, and I feel really weird having to say this, but this is not going to be that kind of tier list, and by that kind of tier list, I mean we're not going to be judging these characters in any strange ways whatsoever. Canonically, they are all minors, and look, I just really like talking about Pokemon, okay? Alrighty, so here's the tier list, and I have all the mainline characters laid out, as well as a few bonus ones from some of the spin-offs. So let's go ahead and lay out what each of the 5 tiers are going to represent, starting with the bottom. When I first started a new save file, and I'm excited to start my new Pokemon journey, the characters in this bottom tier are the ones that bring me back into the reality that I've been playing a game whose target audience is 7 years old. Personally, I think Pokemon is a game that should be enjoyed by all ages, but if Game Freak is going to insist that I reflect on how much of a man-child I am before I even can enter my name, then I will at the very least insist that their work be placed at the bottom of my YouTube tier list. Alright, so after that we have what I'd consider the low tier designs. Now, put differently, Pokemon is a game that presents you with 2 options for your character. I'd pretty much never choose any of the ones in this tier over their counterparts. I'd feel that they're either significantly outclassed by other similar designs in the Pokemon character portfolio, or they have something about their style that just actively distracts me about their design while I'm playing the game. Alright, so in the middle of the pack, we'll consider 2 cases. The first is any player characters that are relatively harmless. I wouldn't consider them very iconic, but at the same time, they don't actively bother me in any way. And on the other hand, if there's a divisive design that has aspects that I really like but also contains some glaring flaws, then we'll just say the good cancels out with the bad and throw them all in the middle. Alright, now up in the high tier, this is where things start to get into the memorable character design area. These are the ones that scream Pokemon trainer when you look at them, and they're really able to capture the qualities of the games that they're from, maybe the regions that they're in, or even the time periods that these games were released in. And then last but not least, at the top of the tier list, we have the dripped out tier. Now, in a game where your character basically says nothing the whole way through, these are the designs that are so good and able to elevate so much personality that they really don't need to. These are instant classics, and in my opinion are the default of where my head goes when someone says Pokemon trainer, or do something so different that they stand out in the best ways possible. We're going to start the tier list with where it all began. We got Red from the original run of Red and Blue. So, the design itself, pretty simple. He's wearing jeans, he's got a black shirt, outer coat, and a hat. But to me, what really elevates this design and makes it interesting is the very distinct art style that Ken Sugimori would use in early Pokemon artwork. If I had to describe it, I'd say it's this somewhat muted watercolor that is contrasted with these really bright white spots. I love it. I think it accentuates the design and makes it pop. I also really like how sharp the geometries are. You look at the clothes, you look at the facial features, especially the chin. It gives the character a really rugged feeling that I think has definitely gone away from the series over time, and you'll see it as I go through this tier list. I'd say I'd summarize my feelings towards Red in the same way that I feel about Gen 1 as a whole. I really like it, but I do think the design is a bit simple and a lot of the time is a tad bit awkward. The pose gives a little bit more of Boy Scout energy than I would hope, and the in-game sprites do not help much here. They leave a lot to the imagination. You got the hardware limitations, but also just the admittedly choppy sprite work from Gen 1. That being said, this design is a classic, and I think it deserves to be in the memorable tier at least. To me, OG Red serves as a great baseline or a reference for what a Pokemon trainer design needs to overcome if it wants to be considered memorable or iconic. Next up, we got Ethan from, of course, Gold, Silver, and Crystal, and I think the best way I could summarize this, if Gen 1 was kind of a timid experiment that Nintendo wasn't sure was going to work, Gen 2 in contrast is Game Freak literally slamming their balls on the table with full confidence they were about to print money. Ethan embodies basically all of that attitude, and let's just walk through this one step at a time. Okay, first, the colors are amazing. The gold and silver highlights of the hat and the sweater, and then you layer it on top of that Pokeball red. It just shouts at your face what game it is that you're playing. He's got the backwards hat, the sharp, almost square-like jawline, paired with that sly smirk and the side eye. He's just screaming that he's a total Chad and you have no shot at beating him in a Pokemon battle. And then on top of the fit, my man sticks his arm out in full confidence so you can see he's dripped out with the Poke gear. He's got a really slick backpack, but he's too cool to wear it like that dorky red kid. He just holds it to his side. This design is absolute peak in the series, and I go to bed every night sad because I don't think Ken Sugimori will ever make anything like it again. Pokemon Crystal saw the debut of the first female character, that being Kris, and this was a big deal. The marketers decided that Pokemon was no longer a boys club, women could be trainers too, and I think that's great. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing really bad about this design, and I really like the sharp blue hair. It mirrors the crystal theme of the game, but for being the first ever female protagonist, I actually kind of find this design underwhelming. Like I said, there's nothing really wrong here, but compared to the super early artwork of Gen 2, look at the facial expressions. They just ooze this coolness factor that I don't think was captured in Kris. Pretty solid design, but there's nothing I can really say that super stands out here. And as the first female protagonist, I do find myself wishing that it was just a bit bolder. Moving on to the third generation, or the Game Boy Advance games. Now, when I think of Pokemon art, I always make the distinction in my head of the vintage look that I felt with the first few generations versus the more streamlined look of the later games. I feel like most people attribute that vintage look mostly to Gen 1 and 2, but I'm always pretty caught off guard by how the initial run of Gen 3 still maintained a lot of those stylistic qualities. All that to say, I see May's design from Ruby and Sapphire as pretty much everything I liked about Kris, but just with a little bit more polish, a little more flair that pushes her into that memorable tier. She has a similar facial structure. I like the hair that basically defies the laws of physics, but I think the colors of her athletic wear really pop out and just coordinate a little bit better. And the bandana, of course, is super sick and memorable. It gives her a little bit more of that spunk that not only fits the vibe of what Hoenn is, but I think just gives her a little bit more personality that I felt Kris was missing. What also really helps out here is that Gen 3 sprites are, in my opinion, some of the best ones across the board. I think they're the perfect mix between enough detail so you can start to make out features, but leave plenty to the imagination. Now with Brendan, I used to actually really not like this design. The headband that he wears looks a little too big on him, and it took me forever to actually realize that his hair is not actually gray. He's wearing like a beanie and it's got some double D thing going on. Honestly, I think it's not super easy to tell and it gets really confusing. The grin is also kind of weird, and the way he's leaning back makes him look pretty dorky. That being said, it's kind of grown on me over time. I do like the strong resemblance it still has to the old Sugimori art style. And I also think that red and black tracksuit is pretty cool. Kind of gives it like he works at Nike vibes. Overall, I'd say it fits the kind of trainers that would be in the Hoenn region. And I'd probably place this in the middle tier with Kris. There's things I like about Brendan, but there's also things that I don't, so a bit polarizing. Looking at the Gen 1 remakes, Firered and Leafgreen, we got Red's updated design, and I'm just going to say it. There's a reason this is the Pokemon trainer they go with for things like Smash Bros. It's because he's absolutely dripped out. First off, this new Red is all business. They've replaced his little Gary Oak smirk with a face full of just nothing but determination. You can look at the way his eyes are at a slight tilt, and the hat also kind of matches that. It just makes it look like he's staring down and analyzing your soul. This is the look of a champion. And the way he tosses the Pokeball up and down just reminds me of like a basketball player who's just dribbling the ball in the court without looking at it at all. Just complete control and composure. I'm a big fan of the color scheme too. The light blue jeans and the lighter blush red really complement each other, but still leave a lot of opportunity to pop from the shadowing and the lighting. They also took the opportunity to make him taller and, at least appearance-wise, age him up a little bit. When I think of like Red on Mount Silver, I don't want to think he's like 10 years old. Pokemon trainers, in my opinion, always work best when they're in that older teen, young adult range. The older Sugimori designs can get away with it a little bit more because these designs were much more stylized and cartoony, but as the art transitioned into something more realistic, I think there definitely became more of a need to be very intentional about finding a perfect medium where both younger and older players could project themselves onto the character. I think this reimagined Red is an absolute perfect example of that. So Gen 1 didn't actually have a female trainer option, making this kind of unexplored territory for the character designers when designing Leaf. I say sorta because there's some very clear inspiration from Green if you read the Pokemon Adventures manga, but I think they did some things very differently that make this design pretty distinguishable from that. One thing I find really fascinating about this design is that compared to the designs of the previous female characters, which I describe as a bit more athletic and tomboyish, they really leaned into a more feminine look for Leaf. We look at the skirt, the light top, and the ladylike bucket hat, especially the bag. I think that's what really accentuates this. The look is less so I'm heading to the gym and more like I'm heading out for a night in the town. They also dropped this really wide body language and big smiles for a subtle smirk and a pose where she's kind of scrunched up and leaning forward and holding her Pokeball behind her back in a way that's kind of like goading you to come at her. She's trying to like hustle you, giving her the appearance that she's just a sweet little girl, but she's going to end up taking all your Pokedollars along the way. I absolutely love this design. I just think it's super good. Almost as good, if not better, than the male counterpart. It's simple, it's stylish, but it's different from what we've seen from the other female protagonists, and it just has this almost devilish confidence that I don't think is captured in any of the other Pokemon trainers on this list. Leaf is absolutely dripped out, and I'm putting her in the top tier. Closing out the GBA era trainers, we have the Emerald redesigns for May and Brendan. Honestly, I don't have a lot to say about May. I like the more striking pose they gave her. The new colors are honestly less interesting to me than the red and black of the original design, but they still look good, and I'd place it maybe just below the original. With Brendan, I'm even less of a fan of the changes they made. The beanie is spikier and even more confusing for me now, but they also made him look a bit more childlike, and as I mentioned before, I really like it when the trainers are in that more young adult phase. So to me, this is a step back. Moving on to Gen 4, on the spectrum of tomboy to girly pop, Dawn leans very heavy towards the girly pop. You look at all the pink and the way she carries her handbag, she has probably the most feminine look so far. Personally, I think it's great. I like that Pokemon presents us with a wide range of characters for people to relate to. I think the black on the pink outfit looks great. It matches the Palkia Dialga color scheme really well, and the beanie looks really cool. This is a memorable design. I don't think I like it as much as the ones at the dripped out tier, just because I feel like these have some subtle X factors in their demeanors that I feel like Dawn is missing a little bit. But I still think it's one of the best in the franchise and deserves to be on the top of memorable. And real quick, while we're at it, I'll just put her platinum design right next to it. I'm a big fan of the pink coat action for the girlies, and the winter design makes more sense for a region like Sinnoh. Now with Lucas, we're going to have our first entry into the lower tier. I honestly really don't care for this design. Unlike Dawn with the pink and white beanie, none of the colors really stand out to me here. They're all just kind of dark and muted, and the only thing that really stands out to me is the flat cap, which is interesting. But I feel like it doesn't work on a super boyish face. It just makes me feel that I should be looking at a very old European man instead. This is also the first time the in-game sprites really bother me, because in pixel art form, the hat just looks way too big and too round, which is a problem when it's what I'm looking at for half the game. I don't absolutely hate this design, but little about it works for me. I do think the platinum design is better and at least brings it into the middle tier. I'm a big fan of the winter aesthetic, and I think the distribution of the colors, like the blue coat and the darker pink, contrast pretty well. Now, staying inside the DS era, we have the Heartgold SoulSilver remakes. A lot of Pokemon fans consider this the peak of the series from a gameplay perspective, but what about a character perspective? Now, instead of offering a redesign for Kris, what they chose to do in Heartgold SoulSilver is offer a new female protagonist. This is Lyra. She has some loose inspiration, but I'd say mostly does her own thing. If I had to describe her aesthetic, I'd say it's farm girl, probably because of the overalls and the big hat that she wears. There's nothing offensive about the design, and I think there was potential, but honestly, I feel like it lacks personality, especially compared to the other female protagonists. So for me, nothing special. Okay, first off, the cool guy body language from the original design has been replaced. I described the new one as a T-pose that looks like his mom asked him to smile for the camera. The baggy sweater and shorts have been replaced with a generic sweater and these weird knee joggers that have cufflets wrapped around his leg. He used to have the cool 90s soap shoes, but those are gone now. Instead, we have these slip-ons that look like something you'd wear in your house so your feet don't get dirty. In case you haven't figured this out, I absolutely hate this design. They took one of the most iconic designs of Pokemon and basically just removed all the swag. What's left is generic and dorky, and this is bottom tier. Gen 5 is very interesting to me because when these games came out, I remember feeling a real shift in the trainer and Pokemon character designs going forward. This generation was meant to be sort of a soft reboot of the series, take a lot of the themes and motifs of Gen 1, but move the setting to a more American-like region and attempt to modernize out Kanto if we could. Everything about Black and White looked smoother and a bit more modern, for better or worse. At the time, I remember this being somewhat controversial, but I think a lot of people feel as though these games have aged pretty well. For Hilda, the designers took a pivot from the very girly designs we saw in Gen 4 to something new. This is a real Hannah Montana to Miley Cyrus, if we will. You got the black jacket, the white top, ripped shorts, and the black high top sneakers. Definitely a very punk rock aesthetic. This is the kind of girl you'd meet at the Blink-182 concert. Her body language is also super wide, and the way she holds her arms to her side and just uses her legs to take up a bunch of space. It exudes a lot of energy and pride, which I think is fitting for a game where the goal was to capture an American. I think this design is awesome. Honestly, it adds a new layer to what Pokemon trainers might look like. There's always going to be a piece of my heart that yearns for the less modern aesthetic of older Pokemon, but it's designed like Hilda's that remind me that new is sometimes a good thing. This is one of the best designs in the series, and it's top tier for it. With Hilbert, I honestly think there's a lot to like about this design. The colors look great. I like the transition from red to blue as the primary color. It makes Hilbert stand out. He's a trendsetter because after him, we are going to see a back-to-back series of very similar blue-wearing dudes, but we're not focused on that right now. The fit is pretty sleek too. It kind of reminds me of something that someone walking through the city streets might wear. His hat design is also probably my favorite of any of the male protagonists, and I like the way he tips it. It's pretty dope. It's also worth noting his similarity to Red, which is another one of the aspects of Gen 5 attempting to mirror Gen 1, and I guess that's where I struggle with putting Hilbert in the absolute top tier. The design is great, but it doesn't do quite enough to really distinguish him from Red. They used the blueprints as something that was already great and then made some minor changes. I'm not going to respect that, but I would respect it more if they did something unique and found a way to make it more interesting, since the 3rd gen design of Red still wins it out for me. All that being said, still pretty solid design, and I'll put it in the memorable tier. Moving on to Black and White 2, we have the first official sequel games for Pokemon. Now, looking at Nate, you can immediately see a strong resemblance to Hilbert, which I'm not going to dock. I think in theory, it makes sense if they wanted to keep some sort of cohesion between the two games. Unfortunately for me, where the problems start is what makes this design stand out. It really just does not work for me. So first, they got rid of all the swag, and they replaced it with athletic attire, which is a choice. But I think the wrong choice was made in that they went less for Red Bull athlete and more 80s spin class. Compared to the hats of the previous characters, I think the visor is honestly kind of lame, and it squeezes his head so that there's this weird anime afro going on. The baggy shorts and leggings that expose his ankles, along with that giant handbag, just looks kind of try-hard and lazy at the same time. It makes you think of someone who goes to the gym and they're just like they're about to do a training montage in a sports movie, but they leave in like 10 minutes. I don't think it's so bad that my eyes are bleeding, but I'm having a hard time finding anything that I really like about it, so I'm going to place it in the low tier. I'd say Rosa is an improvement over Nate. She's still going for that combination between casual and athletic wear, but I think the mix is a little bit better here, and the visor plus the Princess Leia buns is at least better than the afro, and honestly, it's a pretty interesting choice that is somewhat memorable. One thing about Black and White 2 designs that I really haven't mentioned yet, but it really bothers me, is how the eyes and the pupils are styled. I don't know what it is, but they just feel a little more soulless when I compare them to the other Gen 5 designs. I think if I had to put something on it, it's the way their pupils are positioned in the middle as opposed to the corners of their eyes. Maybe I'm being mean, maybe I'm just crazy, but something about that just gives a real dopey look to these characters that I cannot move past. I do like that they try to go for something unique with these designs, but unfortunately, I'm just not a fan. Moving on to Gen 6, we are now in the 3D Pokemon games with X and Y, and let's take a look at Serena. Now, Serena is one of the few characters on this list where if I saw someone wearing this outfit in real life, my head would not go to this person is cosplaying a cartoon character, but it'd instead go to this person has a really solid sense of style. Now, the motif of Kalos is based off of France, which I think this design nails. It's the kind of thing I would expect to see someone wearing during Paris Fashion Week or just kind of walking through the streets trying to look stylish. I'm a huge fan of the color scheme. The dark red skirts and the blonde hair really pop out against the otherwise black attire, and I like the sneakers with the red Pokeball logo at the bottom. Looks really cool, and also just like the way that she holds her hand out, kind of to flex her mega ring like it's a Rolex. The hat and glasses sitting on her head make it look like she's walking through the streets of a place like Barcelona or something on vacation. Just really captures that European inspiration that Kalos is going for. Honestly, I think she's one of the best female protagonists Pokemon has had and deserves to be in the dripped out tier just for the fashion sense alone. With how much Serena's design stands out, I feel like Calem very much lives in the shadow of it. Now, when I had the thought of making this tier list, I honestly completely forgot in my mind what his design actually looked like. I had to look it up, and after looking at his design, I honestly have a really hard time thinking of something that stands out to me. He's the third of a series of dark-haired, blue-wearing male protagonists in a row, and I'd argue he has the least interesting design quirks or personality. I think the best way I could describe this design to me is that I'd probably really like it if it was an ace trainer instead of the protagonist. And if you don't know what an ace trainer is, they're basically this generic trainer class in the game that are meant to be cool, but not stand out too much or outshine the main character. So for that, I'd pick the other option every time. Alright, so for the third time, we're now going to see May again. We're revisiting Gen 3 for Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire. Now, in the making of this tier list, I didn't realize how different this design was compared to the original. If I had to summarize it, I'd say that they made May much more cutesy, and I really don't like it. So first, they replaced her sick pirate bandana with a bow, and then they shrank all her limbs into like these noodles. And if you look at the original design, she had pretty muscular legs, and she had a lot of weight to her. I don't mean that in a bad way, but it just made it more realistic and a little bit less cartoony. Where here they took away both the figurative and the literal weight from the character. I also don't like how you can see her teeth poking out when her mouth is hanging open. It's more of like a chibi look for me that it's just not it for me. I think it loses a lot of what I liked about the original design, and I'm putting it in low tier. Now, just a disclaimer. I'm not an artist. I didn't go to school for something creative. I'm not a character designer. I'm just a guy yapping into his mic on the internet. But when I first looked at this Brandon redesign, my brain just immediately said that something about it just looked off. And I don't know if I'm crazy, maybe I'm just looking at it from a weird angle, but something about the way his pupils are oriented in relation to each other just makes it look weird. Like, my best guess is they tried to angle the eyes in a way such that it gave a little bit of a perspective look of his face, since you're kind of standing from an angle. But what it ends up looking like to me, at least maybe from a distance, is that he's going cross-eyed. I guess I appreciate that they made it very clear this time that the beanie is indeed a hat, but in practice, I just think it looks strange. Like there's something inside trying to get out of it. And the pose, it looks really stiff. The smile looks forced. The only thing I like about this design is that the orange and black athletic wear actually looks pretty fitted and pretty cool. I didn't mention it with May, but I'll mention it here. Also not a huge fan of the sprite work in Auras or the 3D models, whatever we want to call them. I'd say it kind of reminds me of Wind Waker, but if Wind Waker was not good. Yeah, I'm pretty confident in saying that the Auras redesigns of Brendan and May are by far my least favorite of the ones we've seen so far. Still on the 30S, let's look at our protagonists from Sun and Moon, and we'll start with Elio, whose name I actually really like. Right off the bat, I'm a big fan of the surfer hairstyle they gave him. It matches the tropical island boy aesthetic that I would expect of the Alolan region. But with that said, honestly, I think they played it too safe with this design. Now, I'm not saying I expect them to be in like a full-on wetsuit or anything, but for a theme as fun as a tropical island, I think they really missed an opportunity to lean into the beach aesthetic and create something fun. Like, the way I would put it is that if you took off the water shoes, I genuinely think I could stick this character into any of the other modern Pokemon games and it wouldn't look out of place. Give him a pearl necklace, give him some board shorts, give him something that just links to Alola a little bit more, and I probably would have liked this design a bit better. I don't think it's low tier or bottom tier, but it's nothing special. Now, if my critique of Elio is they just played it too safe, I feel like with Selene, they just kind of missed the mark. For one, why is she wearing a beanie? It doesn't make any sense. I would never wear a beanie to the beach. Give her a sun hat or give him some surfer curls and put a little flower in her hair or something. I do like the color palette, but the issue is that it feels more springy than it does tropical. Like, I don't get the vibes that she should be chilling under a palm tree. This is more like prancing through the meadows. Even in isolation, though, I don't think this design is that much spunk to set it apart from the other characters on this list. So I'm picking the other option every time. I'm going to combine Elio and Serene's Ultra Sun and Moon redesigns because I basically have the same problem with them. Instead of leaning into the slick tropical beach aesthetic, they made characters into 8-year-olds and then dressed them like they're going to go to the community pool. Maybe these games are made for kids, and I'm a man-child for thinking otherwise, but in my opinion, this is a huge setback, and both of these belong in bottom tier. Now, I fully recognize that I've been going on a hater streak through the modern Pokemon games, but with Sword and Shield, I actually don't have a lot of bad things to say about the male protagonist, Victor. I like how bright red his sweater is, and I genuinely think his gray beanie looks pretty cool. He's definitely dorky with the skinny jeans, and the way he holds his head is pretty funny. But honestly, a lot of this seems intentional to his design, and it adds a layer of personality to the character. Like, he's dorky, but it's kind of in an endearing way. I'm not in love with the design, but honestly, it's almost there. I think if they just aged him up a little bit and added just a bit more, it just needs some X factor, it could make it into a really memorable character. Gloria's design unfortunately does not work for me. There's things that I like about it. For one, I think the colors stand out. I like the grays that are being used in Sword and Shield in general. The patterns on her clothes and socks are pretty interesting as well, but the main problem I have here is one, the appearance is super young, and then two, with how meek her pose comes off, this design just does not scream Pokemon champion. This is more like what I'd expect to run into on Route 1 when I see like a youngster or last trainer. Pokemon's a series that does have a lot of interesting and unique female character designs, and when I break it down that way, I just think this one's one of my least favorites. Last in line for the mainline Pokemon games, we have Florian and Juliana from Scarlet and Violet. Now, I'm sorry, I'm going to put my hater hat on again, but even if I was a kid playing this game, I think I would still be put off by these designs. When I think of Pokemon, I think of adventures, I think of traveling, going to new and strange places. I don't want to think about my parents shipping me off to boarding school. So that's pretty much all we got for the mainline characters, but since this is my tier list and I can do whatever I want, I went ahead and included some of the characters from spin-off games that I played as well. So if you made it this far, then here's a little bonus. Once again in order of appearance, and we'll start with Mark from Pokemon the trading card game, the video game. Now keeping in mind that this game is literally about playing cards, this character looks absolutely insane. He's got this pattern bandana with this spiky hair coming out, a super long flowing coat, the way he's just lunging at you, super excited about his Pokemon cards. This character looks like they belong in a cereal box in the 90s, and honestly, I kind of love it. I don't know, I think it's just because it's a little more out there. I guess a little more anime than what I would traditionally think of when it comes to Pokemon. And I'm pretty sure if every Pokemon character looked like this, the charm would be lost real quick. But as a one-off, honestly, I think it kind of works, and this design is pretty memorable for me. Some of you at home may be scratching your heads wondering, who is that blue-haired girl? This is Mint. She's a bit of a deep cut, but she is the female variation of Mark from the Japanese exclusive Pokemon trading card game 2, The Invasion of Team GR. Mint never quite made it to the States, but honestly, she can stay in Japan. I absolutely hate this design. I think it's the weird attire combined with the way she like floats in the air. It's something I'd expect to see on a Yu-Gi-Oh card, but not a real one, like a bootleg one that you'd get at the swap meet. Her eyes are also just way too much. They remind me of like Astro Boy, which just puts this cognitive dissonance of, I'm not playing a Pokemon game, I'm playing something completely different. Up next, we got Todd Snap from, of course, the Pokemon Snap series. I have both his original N64 design as well as his redesign for a new Pokemon Snap. As a kid, I had an absolute blast playing the original Pokemon Snap on N64, but let me just say, thank God this game was in the first-person POV, because this design looks like it came right out of a Rugrats episode, and I mean that in the worst way possible. The goofy haircut, the weird striped shirts, yeah, this was a no for me, and I think it especially doesn't help with the N64's awkward 3D graphics at the time. The redesign, on the other hand, looks a lot better. They basically took Todd and completely chatted him out. He now looks like a teenage heartthrob, which honestly I think is pretty hilarious. But other than that, the design is honestly pretty generic, so I'll just toss it in the middle. Capping off the tier list, we have our characters Wes and Michael from Pokemon Colosseum and XD respectively. Now, some backstory. These are 3D Pokemon games that, for the most part, played like a traditional Pokemon game. There was a few things that were different, but I would say in general, they're the closest thing to a 3D Pokemon game out of all the spin-offs, at least at the time. Now, they were developed by a company called Genius Sonority, and the people who made up this company were developers who didn't really want to use Pokemon as a mold. They all had different backgrounds and were more familiar with traditional RPG titles, so Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Persona. Colosseum is a pretty interesting game because it feels like it was designed by a team who wanted to make a Final Fantasy game instead of a Pokemon game. And the end result is a game that feels way more grungy than any of the other Pokemon games that came before it. So the main guy you play is Wes. He's a former gang member turned rogue. The game literally starts with him blowing up his former hideout. He steals this thing called the Snag Machine, which is a device that allows you to steal Pokemon from other trainers. While on the run with his Espeon and Umbreon, he rescues this girl who can see shadow Pokemon and also looks like an alien for some reason, and then goes on a quest to rescue these Pokemon that are essentially being trafficked by an organization called Saphire, whose goal is to ingest Pokemon with darkness into their hearts and make them more powerful. My guess is that the development of Wes, somebody in the room asked, what if Cloud Strife was a Pokemon trainer? This is essentially what you get. Looking at his design, Wes wears what I guess would be considered a trench coat with some sort of tight spandex underneath that looks like it was inspired by the Matrix. The Snag Machine on his right shoulder resembles battle armor. He's got these crazy shield sunglasses hanging off his anime hair and a white chalk streak across his face. I think my favorite's the metal ankle bracelets at the bottom of his legs, but I think his most distinctive feature is that evil little smirk he has while he's staring you down. If all this sounds pretty out there, it's because it is, but if it also sounds awesome, well, that's because it is. Wes is absolutely dripped out. He honestly just won me at having his Espeon and Umbreon hang out on his motorcycle. But honestly, I really believe they did a great job making an older, more adult Pokemon protagonist. I like the outfit. They knew all the right cards they could pull to make him look cool and give him an edge without leaning too hard into the camp and making him look goofy. Of course, the intentional choice to age him up was an absolute necessity, or the region that this game takes place in is made to be very rough and dirty. There's seedy traffickers and gang members and hooligans running around everywhere. Having a 10-year-old run around this place would require way too much suspension of disbelief. Also, a fun fact, this place is based off of Phoenix, Arizona, of all places. Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes can bring something really unique and fun to the table, and I think Pokemon Colosseum is a cult classic for a reason. Now, for the next one, I think Genius Sonority were asked to bring down the edginess a little bit, which I think when XD we'll see that it has a much softer tone to it, and this is very much reflected in the character design for Michael. Now, that being said, I don't need my Pokemon games to be hardcore, and upon first glance, Michael's design's a pretty hard pivot from Wes, but I really like it. I love the way the dark blue on yellow and red looks. Something about it just screams GameCube to me, and I also really like the look of the snag machine this time around. It's just a cool metallic high-tech arm that's pretty Iron Man-esque. And the spiky hair also looks really cool. But there's one thing that really kills me about this design, and it's those brown Disney eyes. Something about those paired with the round face and 3D model just makes me think of those crappy Pixar themed AI generations that I see floating everywhere around the web, and I just can't unsee it. It also does not help how short they made him compared to Wes. There's something there, and they just kind of got fumbled. There's things I really like about this design, and it is interesting, but it's just too polarizing to be anywhere other than the bottom and mid tier. And so that is every character I wanted to include on this list. I'd say things are roughly ordered, but I think the tier placement is probably the most important part, especially when we look at like the dripped out tier. I like these characters for a lot of different reasons, so it's kind of hard to compare them. We'll just say I really like the characters on the top, and I really don't care for the characters on the bottom. There's also kind of a nice bell curve shape going on. Lots of characters on the extremes though, but when I look at it, I'm pretty happy with my placements. And with that, that is the end of the Pokemon Trainer tier list. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed, and if you didn't, feel free to call me dumb in the comments. It'll boost the engagement on the video. You might be interested in this other video I did on Pokemon and nostalgia, so check that out. Other than that, thanks for watching, and have a great day.